or so on current use. UVA, we had the overview earlier this week from the tax department, and then JFO and Ledge Council all also supplied a little bit of information. And just for the committee's information, the Ways and Means Committee is going to be asking us to formally let them know sometime in the next several weeks whether we have any recommendations as it relates to education funding for changes to the current use program. So just be thinking about that as we're taking additional testimony, and it may be helpful when we're asking questions, as we go through the, I'll just also say, since we're on the subject, that likewise, the Education Committee is going to want to hear from us on the Universal School Meals program as it relates to the education fund. So with that, Ryan, if you want to begin, you have a presentation.
Yes, I do have a presentation that's going to orient my comments, but before digging in, I just wanted to share broad remarks about use value appraisal, current use. It's, in my view, one of the most important land use protection programs for the working landscape in Vermont. All 50 states in the United States have a use value appraisal program. They all do it a little bit differently. It is, I don't know if you call it the golden goose or what, it's just one of these very big programs that is very complicated to administer and has a lot of moving parts. And so I am here to talk about some of the agricultural context that applies both to when the program was started and then examining the current state of agriculture today, just to attempt to juxtapose what triggered these programs and what's happening today. I don't have any recommendations, but I'm going to be touching on, what is agricultural use value, how is it applied, and how does it affect farms and the state positively and negatively. Just trying to do some background sharing of information on the topic. No recommendations or anything like that.
Representative O'Brien.
Ryan, just quickly, it says here agricultural climate and land use policy manager. Is that still at the water quality division, or are you your own?
No, I've been in the administration division. No, in the administration division, and I've been there for 3 or 4 years now.
Okay.
In this role, and in admin. No longer in water, folks will remember I did a lot of water work, focusing more on the nexus with kind of the broader outcomes of water quality regulation. How does climate change affect land use? They're all related. So it's kind of what my job is focused on. Here is the introductory slide. And I always, if I can get there we go. So I always like to start with overview context. This is the most recent data imagery for Vermont that shows a breakdown of different types of land use. It's about 80% forest and wetland, 12% agriculture, 4% water, 2% development, right? Very heavily forested state, but it wasn't always that way. This is one of my favorite pictures to share in the State House because you can just look out this window behind you and realize the wonderful forested park that now is behind the State House, as opposed to what it was in the 1880s, which was a pasture. And so this is a photo from the archives. Somewhere between 1870 and 1880 is where the state curator places this photograph. So very different look of Vermont. This is a summary from a 1968 land use report, which was instrumental in providing information justification for Act 250 to come about. And they synthesized, looking back to 1850, the number of farms, the average size of farm, and then how much of Vermont was in agriculture. And back in 1880, where that photo was taken, the high water mark, there were 35,000 farms in Vermont, and 84% of Vermont's terrestrial land area was in farms and farming. Now, of course, you'll notice on the right-hand side of the slide that they, in 1968, predicted really what's come to pass, which is a decrease in the number of farms, a decrease in the percentage of land in farms, and then an increase in the size of farms. And we're going to be digging into that very general graphic into a bit more detail to try to explicate exactly how much has been lost and over what time span. So this is going back to 1925, not 1880. This is from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Agriculture Statistics Service agricultural census, which they conduct about every 5 years today, about every 5 years as you go back. And the further you go back, the more challenging it is to compare to today's numbers because there's slightly different questions and scope of who was surveyed and how they did the surveys. But back to 1925 is, for our purposes, that's what, 100 years or so? You can see the decline in agricultural land. And so this is total farmed land. This is inclusive of cropland, permanent pasture, and woodland that is pastured. So take all of those, and this is what the trend line looks like. From the prior slide, you'll remember I'm going to show the share of the landscape that is in farming, the share of Vermont. So back in 1880, it was 84%. In 1925, at the start of this kind of graphic, about half of the state was in agriculture and farming. 1969, the last census before it kicked off the land use protection programs in Vermont, Act 250, use value appraisal, Vermont Housing Conservation Board, only 21% of Vermont was in farming. And then the most recent agricultural census, which is different from the first graphic, which was from 2016. This is a survey from 2022. Oops, I'm clicking buttons, sorry. 9% of Vermont's terrestrial land base is in farming and agriculture.
And Brian, just to reiterate or emphasize what I think I heard you say, these percentages all the way along would include forested land that is agriculture.
No, it is land that is actively farmed for traditional food and crops. The mix of maple sugar and timber and forest, they are still managed by farms. They are not part of this graphic. When you see 1.2 million acres from 2022 is what farmers manage. We'll get to this in a minute. Half is forest and half is ag land. And so for the purposes of this, open ag land is the condition which is most challenging to maintain because Vermont wants to be forest, right? That is, if you don't cut your fields, grows right up to trees, and soon enough you'll have a forest, and it'll be a real challenge to get it all back. And so this is, just a, theoretical 0 point of, Western agriculture in 1750, high water mark where, we had more farmland and forestry in 1909, and then as ag land has decreased, forest land has recovered because as farms go out of business, if they're subsumed into another one, generally they'll farm the best and leave the rest. And as those pressures of the economy has driven folks to larger economies of scale, equipment has gotten larger. And so a lot of these really small out of the way fields are more challenging to even harvest. And so there's a lot of factors that as a farm goes out, even if portions of that farm are maintained, there's been just a transition from ag land reverting to forest land by and large. This is the slide. So the prior one, so these are two different data sets that I'm plotting on one graph. The first one, the yellow, is the ag census. The other one is from the Forest Service. This is the ag census. So this is to your question, Chair Durfee, about farmed land versus farm managed woodland. And so that yellow here is that total cropland, pasture, and woodland that is pastured. And then on the left here, the green is total woodland that farmers manage, less pastured woodland. So all the trees, whether they're in sugaring or timber or just sitting there, doesn't matter. 50.37% is timber or forest, woodland, sorry, that's what they call it. 49% agriculture. So this is the first time in the modern census that farms in Vermont manage more forest than agricultural land.
What year was this?
2022. the most recent ag census.
Representative Burt?
Thanks, Chairman Durfee. So does that mean the 9% of Vermont that's in your data that is now ag land, would it actually, was it, if we count the woodland that's farmed as well, would be closer to 18%?
Correct. And if you add the barns and ponds and other incidental areas, it's about 20%. So farmers manage about 20% of Vermont's land base, 9% is actively used for growing food crops.
Thank you.
Based on my, based on this. All right, so back to this. Two data sets were showing land uses and land use change over time back a long ways. And now we're going to overlay other land uses, which are mapped wetlands, as well as urban land in Vermont. And agricultural land is the only land use that is en masse decreasing its share of Vermont's land base and is not at least maintaining its footprint. Forestry, you'll hear like they've lost 50,000 acres. The margin of error on that survey is plus or minus 50,000. So it could be 0, it could be 100,000, it could be 50,000. But during that same time frame where that data shows Vermont forest lost 50,000 acres, Vermont agriculture lost 72,000. And Vermont forests cover 80%, agriculture covers 9%. And so the share of loss is much more acute in the agricultural sector today than the challenge, in my view, than the challenges. I know the forestry sector is also really challenged and struggling for a lot of reasons, but agriculture is also really having some significant challenges with maintaining their share of the land base. And so, as the share of farmland dropped precipitously back, beginning in the conversation obviously started sooner than this. 1968 was that big report that kind of codified it all and made recommendations and ideas. 1972 gave us Act 250. 1978 gave us the Use Value Appraisal Program, which I'm going to talk more about today. And then 1987 gave us Vermont Housing Conservation Board. So those are the three biggest representations, but not the only representations of steps the state of Vermont has taken to attempt to protect farms from attrition and loss. Make it
Brian, question?
Brian, besides Vermont land that was once farmland wanting to grow up to be forest, have you also tracked sort of land that's been developed? So it's, that was farmland, and now it's a house or a driveway or a lawn, that sort of thing. It's probably not coming back because it's developed in this sort of suburban way.
It's very challenging to give you a clear answer across the state. It's an area that we need more study in, but I will share an exercise we conducted to attempt to understand what is the most populated area is Chittenden County. We have an impervious surface layer that is available. We have a map of agricultural soils that are available. And in those agricultural soils, there are designations for prime and statewide soils, those that are best suited for growing food crops. If you overlay impervious surface and prime ag soils in Chittenden County, all of that development occurs on 69% prime and statewide soils. Prime and statewide soils are the only dry soils that don't need a permit to be converted if you're below active, like wetlands, heavy cut. There's a lot of restrictions on land that isn't open. And so it makes sense, even before all of the regulatory permit programs we have, the historic development in Chittenden County, it's on prime ag soils because that is the easiest place to build. It's flat, it's dry, your foundation might not leak as bad. And today the regulatory overlay is kind of the punchline of this presentation, which is, there's a lot of pressure on agricultural land from development today in ways that may not have been as acute even back in the 70s, but that's another topic of conversation. This is about current use. But to answer your question, yes, they are very vulnerable to development because once you strip the topsoil and you dig a foundation or you put, you're never getting that back to that strata, until we get another ice age, you're not going to get necessarily that way again anytime soon.
Brian, this is also off topic, but I'm really kind of intrigued and think you might have something to say about it. The pretty sharp drop between, and there's a different chart, but between, say, 1940, the census data between 1940 and the 60s, where you see that then it's continued to decline, but it leveled off. Can you talk about what was happening socioeconomically?
We'll get there.
Okay.
Hopefully. I don't know. I don't really have an answer. I'm not a historian, but I have data that shows kind of what's happening, but it's there's dislocations in the economy.
And I realize it's off topic because we are, as you said, here to talk about current use, but
It's all related, and that's what's so challenging about. I really appreciate an hour to talk about this, but there's a lot of stuff to wrap up and like, why did this happen? And I can't answer them all, and I don't have the expertise to answer it all. You're going to need to talk to a lot of people to get that answer. But I'll share my perspectives on it. Just reminding us, okay, so this is what they predicted in 68. Well, they show what's happening up until about 68. You got those dotted lines showing it's going to still keep going down. So what ended up happening? This is between, we're zooming in on the timeline. We're doing 1935 to 2022. And we're doing this because it's 43 years. So 1978 is the year current use was stood up in Vermont. The law was passed, right? And so looking at two time scales, it's been 44 years since it was passed. So let's look at what happened 43-ish, 44 years before current use was passed. Like, let's examine the same rates of attrition. And they lost 70% of the farmland in the 40 years preceding the passage of the current use program. That's a lot of loss. Similarly, we've lost 50% of the farmland since current use was passed. The absolute number is much less, of course, right? It has attenuated that very sharp decline. And I don't know if you can attribute it all to current use, but it certainly helped, right? But it has stemmed, slowed, but the attrition is still significant in my view. Half of the farmland being lost since then, I think, is a real challenge for food security conversations and viability within the state. And then here's just the overlay of the programs that were adopted. All right, current use, right? Very, very important program. This is from the tax department showing agriculture acres enrolled, forest acres enrolled. So green is ag, orange is forest, blue is then the total acreage. And you can see that agriculture is kind of leveled off. Forest continues to increase its share. And so what does that look like, a 50% loss of farmland since 1978? This is from the 2022 Ag Census. 57% of all Vermont farms were unprofitable and lost a combined $85 million in 2022. This is a net cash farm income that is analyzed from Table 5 of the 2022 USDA Ag Census. Over half of farms had a negative net cash farm income. They didn't track net cash farm income in 78, otherwise I'd share that.
Representative O'Brien?
Is there a stat for all Vermont businesses? It'd be sort of interesting if, just in general, if.
Don't follow other sectors, just ag. Application. So that's all context to show, I hope to some degree, that we lost a lot of agriculture. They put up these programs. It's helped stem it. We're still having big challenges. But now I'm going to switch into talking about agricultural current use value and how is it applied? What does it mean for farms and their tax bill? So there's a definition of current use. Defines use value assessment as the assessment of property upon the basis of its value in a particular current use rather than upon the basis of its market value. And these are the annual agricultural use values that Vermont has used going back to 2012. And you'll see that is a rather linear increase in the value of agricultural use of cropland. And we'll talk about what this means for a tax bill, because that's important to then break into how is that ag use value calculated. Here are all of the different categories of, on the top left here are, this is adapted from a tax department kind of FAQ or fact sheet, like what does this mean for my tax bill? And so what we're going to do is we're going to take 100 acres of agricultural land. This is a complete hypothetical, right? Like everything changes, the property rates, tax rates change. the example they use on on their website and their fact sheet, it includes a house site, it includes forest, it includes forest that's far away from the road, and it includes ag land. I'm just trying to simplify, keep all of the variables the same, except for changing that ag use value to try to show what happens as that ag use value increases. What does that mean? And so to do this, I'm using their method, but I'm simplifying it. So we're going to take 100 acres of ag land. We're saying the enrolled land value of that is $220,000, and that without current use, the tax bill would be about $4,000 for that field, that 100-acre field that's valued at $220,000. If you were to apply if you're going to apply the land use reduction calculation to the enrolled land value, right, you would get a total taxable value that is much diminished from without current use. And so what we see here is you take the enrolled land value, 220,000, you subtract the use value, and then you arrive at what the land use reduction is going to be. That is then applied to the real value of the property, and you apply the tax rates. And so that would be a tax savings of about $3,300 for this 100-acre farm if they enrolled in current use. And so it is a significant tax savings compared to it not being enrolled. To now look at what does the use value of the agricultural use value mean as it increases over time. So same thing, 100 acres, the use value going back to 2012, we're going to use that 2019 one, which is in the prior example, and then the most recent published one, which is 2024. And when you apply all these in 2012, the tax bill is going to be 507. And then in 2024, the tax bill is going to be 965, right? As the ag use value goes up, the amount of your land use reduction decreases because you can make more money off of your land according to this equation, and therefore you don't need as much as a tax benefit, right? That's how it works. The ag use value goes up, your tax benefit goes down. And that is something that since 2012, the tax has increased almost doubled. It's still much, much less than it would have been, but it's still a linear increase year on year because inflation is what really influences this ag land use value. And it's, as we'll dig into, to do the calculation, it's not exactly tied to the profitability of the farm because we don't have that data. We're not Ohio, we are an ag state, but as far as having, states put a lot of effort into trying to track and understand farmer income and values for their tax programs because they're much, much bigger than us. We have the Ag Census. That is the most reliable and replicable or consistent data source that we have. And so that is where Vermont draws its value of its information by and large for which is coming up with that proxy for for farmer income off of the land.
Representative Burt, did you want to ask a question?
I guess I'll say it now. Yeah. I was just going to mention before, because it was before this slide, that from previous meetings we've seen the price of milk has been the same since 2013. I know the price of syrup has been the same since 2013. That's a pretty easy number to work with to show that we're not generating a whole lot more milk per acre in the state than we were in 2013.
Right, and so then it might call into question why the number has doubled
Exactly.
it got not quite doubled, but.
And we'll dig into that now. Well, where this comes from, how we do it. So agriculture use value is the net ag revenue over the capitalization rate. That's what the papers say. You can write it with all these symbols, and then you can apply these symbols to how we calculate this. This is, in the end, how we end up getting the use for agriculture. It seems complicated, but it's not really. So we're going to break it down. The We rely on the weighted average rental rate, the cash expense for farmers for renting different types of land. This is an annual data point which the Farm Service Agency of USDA tracks, and it's what this program has used since for a long time to track that value of agricultural land. And so, I'm just walking through this. I don't really think need to dig into too much detail on this, but basically you balance the amount of pasture land we have, cropland we have, how much does it cost to rent, how much does it cost to rent, do that for 1 year and then do it for 5 years, and you're averaging them all. The capitalization rate is the value of debt to the cost of capital. They used a 10-year average of 30-year treasury bonds. There's a factor for risk, and then the effective statewide property tax. Sum them all together, and you get the capitalization rate. You do a 5-year weighted average of the rental costs as well as the number of acres, and then you apply them together, and you get an agricultural value for that particular year for the 2023 growing season. You then take that year and you average it with the previous 4, right? Because we're balancing over 5, because if it would jump each year a significant amount. And so when they built into this concept is a way to kind of attenuate that sharp rise by using multiple data points. And so we end up with a current use value of 483. And this would be breaking down all of those equations into a simpler equation. But what is important to remember is that ag use value, it is how much it costs to rent fields, right? It's not the net cash farm income of farms, and it would be really challenging to integrate that into this process when you have negative income, right? It's very challenging to make that work. And so this program works by providing that tax abatement to landowners for keeping land in a working state. It's reflective to the value of capital, and it is responsive to the amount of land that's available, but it isn't directly tied to how well our farm's doing financially. And so that's an independent thing that I just want to, they say the ag land value is going up, according to this, I do, because I do the equation, that's how it works, but it's not reflective of how well farms are doing financially. So I just want to make sure that's understood, and that's where that.
So can you explain the capitalization again, or is it's not specifically an ag number, right? It's for all capital or assets, right? So buildings and
how much
homes,
my
businesses.
Conceptually, my understanding of it is, what could you do with that money, right? Like how much money could you make off of that revenue?
Okay.
And so it would be, you've earned this, you've invested, like this is the value you could get from it. And that's the breakdown. Other states use different percentages or different rates, but it's about the same. Like how much money can you make off that money? Is my understanding of it. Okay, sorry. Again, like I said in the beginning, it's a complicated process. There's a lot of moving parts. And one of the other ones is trying to dig into, eligibility. I heard from, tax department and JFO talking about some of the farmers that kind of get caught up in the gears of this program as they either age out of being able to farm, or some of the farm financials really drive choices where they may have wanted to keep the land in farming. But if you have bills due and no other option but to subdivide your land, right, that is catching a lot of folks because farming is so challenging to make profitable. And so what we have up here is the definition of agricultural land. And, the big breakdown is, do you have 25 acres of agricultural land or less. And if you have less than 25 acres, you have to meet these tests, right? So it explains the current use program requirements when a lease is used to enroll farm buildings or fewer than 25 acres of agricultural land in the program. The lessee, so you're an owner, you're not a farmer. You have 20 acres, you want to put in the current use, and family down the road has been haying that field for 40 years, right? Reading this today, the person you are leasing that ag field to must be a farmer. But a farmer as defined by the current use statute. And the current use statute defines farmer as someone who earns at least 1/2 of the person's income from the business of farming. And so I'm going to show, so here's that definition statute of what a farmer is. We remember that there's been a significant loss of farmland between 1935 and 1978, and again between 1978 and 2022. And what I want to do is I want to try to look at farming in 1978 and farming in 2022, and how many farms can qualify for that definition of a farmer under that IRS code, already earning more than half of their income from farming. Because, what the example I think I've heard shared in this group is, elderly person unable to keep farming, subdivides their land, a portion of it off. It was under 25 to begin with, so they have to have a farmer that leases it. That farmer has been farming it for 30 years. They did the subdivision. They submitted their paperwork to re-enroll in current use, and they got hit with the land use change tax because the farmer that's been farming it for 30 years doesn't qualify as a farmer under the program because they had to get a job off farm because they couldn't make enough money on the farm. And so the land is still being farmed. You're still getting food and crops off the land. It's being used by a farmer to feed animals, but the economic conditions are very different than that definition, than when that definition was first established. And so what I'm going to try to do here is just show some of the differences in the share of revenue that is produced by farms. And so this is summary by market value of ag products sold from 1978 and in 2022. So we're just going to start off, for context, median income.
John, did you want to jump in?
And I was just thinking in the context of what you just put up there, that 57% of Vermont farmers were losing money.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, right. It is very, very challenging economic conditions right now. And if you're not able to make that, you're going to have to make it off the farm, or very often one person farms, one person works off the farm for health insurance and, stable income, and not all, but farming is tough to get the tax stuff set up right, because all you do is farm, and doing all that paperwork is time and challenging. And so you may not be organized in such a way as the revenue is representative of the farm business and rather is in the, anyway, there's a lot of reasons why someone may not be defined as a farmer, but from a plain view of it, they are at least involved in agriculture.
And the requirement is 1/2 of gross income. Just looking at the slide there.
At least 1/2 of the farmer's annual gross income from the business of farming. Good point. Median income was $15,000 in 1978, $80,000 in 2023. 7,000 farms in 1978, 6,500 in 2022. Oh, it's pretty good. We haven't lost so many farms. Farms with sales of $20,000 or more, 3,162 in 1978. Farms with sales of 100,000 or more, 1,065. Ryan, 100,000, 20,000, you're comparing two different things. Use the Minneapolis Federal Reserve to ask $20,000 in 1978 is worth $96,000 in 2024. And so to compare between those two time points, they used the 20,000 and above, which is all they reported in 1978. They didn't have this breakdown of data for the less than 20,000, whereas today we do go down to no income farms up to the million or over, right? But that 100,000 is kind of the similar tranche of farms that earned more than that from the gross sale, right? So these are sales, this is not profit, but this is the sale of ag products, 20,078, about equivalent to 100,000 in 2022. 43% of farms in 1978 had sales greater than that, 20,000. Only 16% of farms in 2022 sold more than $100,000 of products. 67% of the land was tied with that 43% of farmers, so it was a bit more balanced in breakdown. The average size was a bit more balanced. Today, the percent of land in farms with sales of $100,000 more, 53%. So 16% of the farms are managing about half of the land in the state. And so you have half of the land managed by a whole lot of farmers. And it's really challenging to sometimes meet that definition of, the half of your gross income coming from farming. And so I think, just the scale of farming has changed in many ways. The market has driven, economies of scale. And so you have to get bigger and more efficient. And that really, I think, is reflected in this, anecdote about a grouping of farms and a scale of sales and median income. Like, what do we think of, what a household output could be? Anyway, concentration and many fewer farmers that are fully only engaged in farming, right? Many have to do many different things to make it go. And so I'm going to just close with why is this important? Why I'm so much of my context is climate change is going to make it even more difficult to stay on farms as they are impacted by flooding and then droughts, right? We're going to have one and then the other, maybe some in the same year. We know all types of farms are going to be affected. All sizes of farms are going to be affected. We know negative cash flow is something that's really going to result when your annual crop is completely destroyed by flooding. Insolvency is going to be a challenge. And crop insurance federal crop insurance does not really work for our size and scale of farm. And if they incurred $45 million worth of damage, there's about 10 million of relief that came from state sources and federal sources as well. So it is challenging. It is, a lot of farms had negative net cash farm income. Then they're also hit with these losses from this is 2023. It happened again in 2024. And so I'm going to try to contextualize in some of the pressures on the agricultural land base. What we have here is a representation of different types of extreme climate change induced weather events that are going to happen, from extreme rain to hurricanes, water stress, wildfires, heat stress, and sea level rise. And extreme rain, the dark red high, is going to be the most likely threat we're going to be dealing with. Sea level rise, not so much. Again, unless we have another ice age, we have another inland Champlain Sea, sea level rise isn't really going to threaten us. But if you zoom out to the rest of
Sorry, can you just go back to that one for 1 second? So if you look at the middle one with the hurricanes, I'm in Windham County, which is the dark red one. Why?
You'd have to ask those that drafted the UVM climate assessment for why that county is here. Probably.
But the eastern, you would think the northern ones would also be, but all right, well, just lucky, I guess.
I'm just showing the graphics. I didn't do this work.
All right.
So zooming out right to New England, extreme rainfall is going to affect everyone. Sea level rise is, we have some high issues here. We got very high challenges that are going to affect where the vast majority of the population of New England is centered. And so as sea level rise advances and it becomes more challenging to live along the coast, people are going to have to relocate. And Vermont is one of those places that is, relatively well suited compared to many other regions of this country. And so this is from American Farmland Trust, and it is a estimation of the number of acres that are going to be lost on a county basis from a business as usual scenario, and then an accelerated runaway sprawl scenario. And somewhere between 40 and 60,000 more acres of loss by 2040 is what they predict. And one of the reasons is going to be that folks are moving away from really challenging weather events. What does this mean, right? The rest of the country is where most of the food is grown, and most of those places are going to, LA was on fire not too long ago, running out of groundwater in certain places, extreme heat, more wildfires are really going to threaten the production of the food supply. And so thinking about regions in the country where growing food is going to become maybe not easier, but maybe less challenging than some other parts, and northeastern Vermont is very well suited. This is from New England Feeding New England, which is one of the many 30 by 30 concepts. Their approach is to ask, what would it take for the New England states to provide 30% of their food from regional farms and fisheries by 2030? The best estimate they have of all production of food and from farms and fisheries, it's absolutely not all consumed in New England. It's a lot of it's exported, but 21% is where we're at. So to go from 21% to 30% would require 590,000 acres of new cropland being brought into production to go from 21% to 30%. And their approach is also to think about not just the additional cleared land, but a rebalancing of the types of foods. We need our dairy, but we also need an increase in many other types of foods to be grown as well. And for context, 590,000 in new cropland would need to be brought into production across New England. It's not just Vermont. They did identify Vermont and Maine as those that are the historic agricultural producers and have the most opportunity because they haven't converted all of their prime ag soils yet. But the ag census showed 540,000 acres of land in Vermont is used for farming. And so this is where I say you have to double the size of Vermont agriculture to meet that 30% goal. To go from 21 to 30 is a doubling of Vermont agriculture. And so just like looking out at the landscape and thinking we need twice as much to go from 21 to 30 is like one of those real consequential thought ideas that makes me say the land that we have in farming today, probably should try not to lose it. It's impossible to get back, and we need as much as we can get.
Representative Supranat?
Thank you. Was that based off of like cross-sector needs, or were you thinking like this is one area of ag industry that we really could use more? How was that calculated? Was that like if we were trying to have 30% of it to be local, what components go into that? And what kind of breakdown of sectoral percentages exists?
Yeah, you're going to want to get the folks in who put this together. It wasn't me. I just read it. They looked at it from a rather holistic perspective. They looked at food servings that are available. They looked at our current diet. They looked at a diet that is healthier. They looked at a diet that better suited for human health. They looked at a current production. They looked at future population, the estimated production of all those different types of crops. They did an economic analysis, it is beyond the scope of this presentation for me to get into those details, but it is very well considered, and I encourage folks to read it because I think it's very well done. And I think it lays out very clearly the importance of agriculture in Vermont, even beyond just economy or rural character, aesthetic, rural community, like food security and climate resilience, I think are really important considerations as to why use value appraisal is such an important program, because it does make it affordable, right? We have some challenges with farming is not super viable for a lot of different types and scales of farms. And so as people retire and no one can take it over, they're stuck in the middle of really tough choices, and the balance of folks that are available to farm, they may not be able to get that gross income in the way that they used to, because it's just really challenging to make a go of it in farming today.
Representative Lipsky?
Yes, thank you. Ryan, Vice Chair Supranat, went back ask for a slide back a couple, could you please bring that up?
You got it.
Is what I was trying to comprehend. There was a term called underutilized ag
Mhm.
land.
Mhm.
And a need for 500,000 more.
Yep. Yes.
And the other,
Oh, you want this one?
so this indicates there's 401,000 existing underutilized acres.
Mhm.
Plus 580,000 additional acres of cleared land. Do we really need 500,000 more acres of ag land? We could. But
They
You-
envision across New England, all this open idle land and being
that's all
pushed off.
across all, that includes all.
Yes, it's not Vermont. This is a New England food systems plan. So it's not incumbent on Vermont to do anything. But to try to contextualize what this would mean for the state if Vermont wanted to do this unilaterally. Those are, and we don't have 400,000 acres of open idle underutilized land, right?
But New England does.
I don't know if it does, but they say we would need to, I imagine it does.
Yeah, we don't know.
The report has very good documentation of how they came up with that. I don't have the time or the memory to explicate how they estimate it, but it is both. It is taking open idle, making it more productive, and then clearing and returning.
And then my final question, not related to this slide. Because I'm in awe of your analytics and skills and knowledge, but all your flags indicated that Act 50 went into effect in 1972, whereas I recall it being passed in 1970. The transmission didn't get rolling for 2 more years, but it passed in 1970.
Absolutely, and so 78 is when UVA was passed, 80 is when people enrolled, and so, yeah, there's
Okay.
probably, I apologize, and I can go back.
No, I'm not. I'm just curious if there was. 'Cause
Probably just.
I remember being in office at the time when that immediately affected any land
Yeah.
use application. So anyway.
Thank you.
Representative O'Brien.
Just a question for the committee and maybe Ryan. Also, what, this week, didn't we hear that, I mean, we're looking at that statistic of, we need what, 500 some thousand acres, to be added to our ag. But when it's considered cropland, right, we're talking hay and corn, mostly for dairy, would take up the vast majority of our cropland now, where
Yes.
did they say, somebody maybe, Jake said we have what, like 3,000 acres in vegetables, tiny little amount. 6,000?
Yeah.
Plus a rounding factor, so it's
Right.
like 6,200.
So you wonder about those two, like if we had 100,000 in vegetables compared to just raising hay for, livestock, that would make a big difference probably.
This report has a good breakdown of the current production and how much it satisfies of regional demand in dairy. We still need more, if you're just looking at New England and you exclude New York, right, we still need some dairy, but as we look towards the food stuffs that are not grown in New England that we are going to need, yes, more of that grain, root vegetable, other types of crops are going to become or are more needed based on what that report prognosticates for a good balanced agricultural future that's predicated on a healthy diet for people living within New England.
As far as the current use calculation goes, I have 2 questions or thoughts. The rather complicated formula with all the Greek symbols there. Don't want to dig into that. But is that in statute, or is there a reference in statute that says use the best available thinking, or how is it?
It is part of the rule and administered by procedure. So it is not prescribed by law directly, those values. They are consistently used in this manner for a very long time. And so there's a lot of precedent for using those figures. But it's my understanding that the law does not prescribe those ones being used.
Okay, good. And then, I mean, and I'm not suggesting that that needs to change at all.
Neither.
Good. Then the other question is, as far as I could tell from your explanation as we were going through that, as outside pressures, market values increased, even if we're only looking at what we want to come up with a use value here, is that use value impacted or affected by market value in the calculation in some way? And again,
The sale of goods? Like, what do you mean market value? Market value.
market value of the land. So if there are developmental pressures, if there are other pressures that have nothing to do with agriculture, in the calculation that we're most interested in here.
Just conceptually. You say it exactly right. Sorry.
Because I heard, that it has to do with the rental value. And if I own a piece of land and I have the option of renting it to someone or leasing it, as opposed to selling it and, cashing in.
It is net agricultural revenue and the capitalization rate. It is how much money can you make off of agriculture? How much more money can you make from that money? The value of the land, how it's assessed, other pressures are not included in that calculation.
But on that score, I've had ag land, wasn't current use season, but I never collected. It meant more to me financially to give the land away, the crop, the hay, than to try to produce hay and sell it or brush hog it to keep it. So, and there were many, many neighbors in Morrisville and Stowe that did the same thing. To the point of almost paying someone to crop it.
And so that's just, I'm not trying to
And we're not
impugn there are challenges with using the rental rates because there's a lot of informal arrangements in Vermont that are, as you say, most of the stuff is given away. This is the price of the best soils that you actually have to pay for, right? And so it is stilted in that direction. And yeah, we know we have to fight over soil rental rates, which are really based on a lot of these values. And there's a lot of gaps, but again, it's the best data we have. And so it's a limitation as a small state that we can't overcome without a lot of investment in economic track.
I mean, to your point, if we put up the statistics for fair market value for those acres that you were doing for, the current uses, ag acreage number they come up with, right, that would represent the pressures of development because it's the gap between those two, right? So I suspect fair market's probably at least double just the way that has to, if not more.
I think it's doubled in the past 4 years. Not just since 1978. I can't even imagine.
So you continue to see savings. The savings isn't being eroded, even though the current.
Right,
use
if
tax rate
anything,
is increasing.
you're actually saving more now.
Possibly.
If
Right,
fair
yeah.
market's outpacing
Yeah.
that calculation.
Possibly, yeah. Very, very likely. Representative Boston.
Yeah, just a quick question. So the chart up there I thought was really interesting with the how we could meet 30% of our food needs. And it was very small print from this distance, but it said, one of the things that we need to do is eat more fruits and vegetables, right? So this is maybe a question more for the chair, but we've met with people who come in and advocate about dairy. Do we have people who come in and advocate about farmers that are just growing vegetables and fruits in Vermont?
There's only
I guess
6,000 acres, so
Yeah.
they maybe don't have as many.
Because we've had NOFA, but NOFA is also animal agriculture. It feels like maybe, how do we hear from those folks that are trying to make this work so we could know how to encourage others?
I think the Vermont Fruit and Berry Growers Association could be great. They also incorporate
Okay.
some vegetables into that.
Yep.
Vernon Grubinger would probably be a helpful person.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, just, something to think about.
Observationally, which isn't science, but we can drive in Orange County, Caledonia County, in every county, and see stunning side hill farms. I've many times been to Burke's Orchard. It's sort of a side hill farm. Not a giant portion of it is growing food, but there are so many owned side hill small farms. Are 80% second homeowners, doesn't matter. That's available cropland for fruit, vegetables, berries, very adaptable. Birds is an example of an incredibly productive and diverse side hill farm, but that land is still here. How is it accessed? That's a whole other thing.
Just a short follow-up about that. So I mean, I was just thinking when we had the Dairy Council in the other day, they were giving the example of how they were able to help support farmers like, oh, this was our marketing and now we changed our model and now we can sell more goat milk. But like, who's helping the vegetable farmers? It's like, is it us? Or is there, it seems like there should be a market-based organization that's able to help those folks too.
The Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, the Ag Development Division, they run a lot of capacity grants for
Yeah.
a lot of different sectors, including vegetable.
Yeah.
And so the Agency of Ag certainly
Yeah.
tries to support that. And one of the takeaways from the New England Feeding New England is we have to maintain the current dairy and we need more of these other types,
Mhm.
right? So it's not decrease, increase, it's
Right.
maintain, increase.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to point out too, that in 10 years ago, we were at about $280 an acre. Raised current use value. And we're at over almost 480. So that's a
Yeah,
big,
250 to 480, yeah.
I mean, those costs do add up for large farms.
Right, going back to your earlier,
And it's just gonna keep going up because inflationary pressures keep going up. That's how it works in the system. So it's gonna keep decreasing the over time, it's gonna keep decreasing the tax benefit to the landowner to some finite, but it's still a good benefit compared to no current use.
For sure. I just want to highlight that we have, dairy farms, maple farms, vegetable farms that,
Mhm.
and myself included with produce, we're not making a whole lot more than we were 10 years ago, but yeah, all of those, every single cost is.
Their costs just. And I have a presentation that kind of breaks down over time, the dairy price and then the profitability calculations that are behind that. And it's, yes, just the input costs have skyrocketed as prices paid to farmers has remained pretty stagnant.
right. Any other questions for Ryan?
Who can we talk to about just the overall sort of that whole problem of what is farming and who's a farmer? Because your statistics on, if half the farms are losing money, like what does it mean if, you farm and at the end of the day, your net is $500 or something, and you're still a farmer or.
Yeah, so Ryan, that point that you were making, I think is what Representative O'Brien is talking about. If we wanted to dig into that a little bit, would you be the person at the agency or are there others who would?
We just submitted a brief on a project that attempted to answer what is agriculture? What is farming? And yes, myself or someone else from the agency, we could talk about some of the legal constructs that have been set up that define farming and apply it through programs. But I think there's also this other analysis about we define farming in these very narrow ways because we want to either limit regulatory oversight or limit economic benefit in the form of the current use program, right? So you got to narrow it. That's different from agriculture and farming and how that can happen at many different scales and the sale. And so anyways, I don't want to volunteer, but I can check in with folks at the agency and see if there's someone that wants to talk about that if you're interested, because it's salient because there's a lot of folks that are engaged in agriculture but may not always meet the definition of farming depending on the program they're regulated by or benefit they want to realize by qualifying for a certain program, say.
And I think that's kind of a curiosity of mine too, is when we're considering trying to reach that 30% regional threshold. And we're looking at the definition of what it means to be a farmer. And then you consider what it means to be somebody on a homesteading scale who was maybe under those thresholds, who is still producing food likely for their own personal consumption at rates much higher than folks purchasing from an independent farm themselves. Where are those stats figured in that overall 30% procurement and the acreage requirements that you're saying we need to get to that?
They're counted in the ag census. If they fill it out, it's just $1,000 of production and value. And so there's 1,000 farms that report no income and are counted in the census, right? So you do, and there are a lot of very small backyard operations that are reflected in the modern census and who qualifies. And so it's certainly not inclusive of everyone in the state that engages in that type of backyard farming, in my view. But I do think there is a decent cohort that is included in that quantification of acres in a certain type of production.
And they are included in the 30% goals as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, all sizes, scales are needed. We need local community, we need individuals, we need big distribution because, that's just how our world is organized. But anyway, that's just speculation and not just a comment. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways and things that we're thinking about. So we're thinking now about back to the 30 by 30 in the farming context,
Yeah.
not the other context. That didn't help what I just said. We're thinking about feeding 30% of New England by 2030 with our own, what we grow here. But we're also thinking about current use and how are we inadvertently, maybe unintentionally, maybe because we haven't updated numbers since the 60s, excluding people who we actually would like to include either from the current use program or other things. So let's stop there though, take a break, and thank you very much, Ryan.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.